Welcome back to another episode of Wrenching with Redbeard. I'm on the way to work early today, and thought I'd get on to tell a little story about some diagnostic things that have been happening lately. Some bad, some good. Some things to look out for, I guess, in the future if you want to take some advice from these stories, whatever. For example, I had an F-150 come in 2014, four-wheel drive. No, yeah, it was four-wheel drive. And he had a clunk when you accelerate. Come to a stop, let off the brake, like it's at a stop sign. Come to a stop, let off the brake. Right when you go to hit the gas, it would clunk. You'd hear a thud. You'd think maybe motor mounts. No, it's not the same. It's not repeatable multiple times. You have to put it in neutral or back into reverse to unload the drivetrain. Then do it again, and you can do it multiple times. You don't have to actually move. You just move the drivetrain back and forth, forward and reverse. And I was able to get it to do it over and over again. One of the managers and he thought it was the leaf springs. I said, no, I think it's coming from up front somewhere. Go ahead and take a look at those motor mounts. So we popped the hood, I torqued the motor, hit drive and reverse, and he's just standing there like waiting for me to do it. Said that motor's not moving at all. Well, I did it with him on the ground, and he said, well, wait a minute, that's that transmission mount. Transmission was, lurching in the air. Alright, did a transmission mount. It wasn't separated, but it was sagging, a little soft. Changed the transmission mount, went and drove it. He came back and said, manager, not the customer, came back and said, well, it's better, but it's still there. What else could it be? No idea. I put a pry bar on everything, on the ground, off the ground. We had it out in the parking lot, was back and forth, looking at leaf springs, the differential, the pinion angle, U-joints, all of it. And some of you may already be at this point in the story going, yep, I know exactly what it is. And you're probably right. So I get it back in, and we're ready to do something else to it. I forget what it was. Not important. And I said, go ahead and pop the hood, because he was driving and getting ready to take it out. And I said, go ahead and pop the hood. He goes, I looked at the mounts. I said, I did it for you. Now you do it for me. So he torqued the motor, and I looked at it, and every time that you would put it in drive and punch it, just give it a little beat, it would, the motor would kind of move upwards, but when you would give it a little extra throttle, the motor would actually lurch forward or reverse, depending on which selection of the transmission you were in. And I'd never seen that before. I said, well, that's probably it. It's probably the mounts shifting and hitting the frame. So I spent hours changing these mounts, both engine mounts. And if you have never done engine mounts on an F-150, it calls for like 6.5 hours, because you got to pull all kinds of stuff and whatever. So we pulled the mounts out, put the new ones in, everything's good, got it all back together. Some bitch still making noise. Same exact noise, didn't change at all. I mean, maybe a little bit, but it's still there. The noise is still there. So I get to looking on forums, Google, websites. Hey, anybody ever had this problem before? And a common issue with a lot of these F-150s is a driveline clunk. And I forget what it's called. Slip clunk or something, or I don't know. And the problem is, on a two-piece drive shaft, there's a TSB on Ford. On a two-piece drive shaft, the slip yoke inside the drive shaft, where the two pieces come together, binds up. The grease gets dry. It creates some play inside of the joint. It binds up and slips. It pops. And that's the clunky here. On a one-piece drive shaft, this is not as well documented, but a one-piece drive shaft, more common in two-wheel drive or a different cab design, I forget what the qualifications are, but the one-piece drive shaft also produces a clunk, but the slip yoke is not in the middle of the drive shaft, it's inside the transfer case or the end of the transmission, where the drive shaft goes into one of those items. So I took the drive shaft off and looked at it, and it's not bone dry, but I could see a little bit of grease. And it calls for XG8, I think is the part number for this grease. It's a special grease. I guess lithium grease supposedly messes up seals. So they say don't use it. It's supposed to be, I can't think of it now. Some sort of silicone-based something or other. It's a grease, but it's a driveline grease. So I found a YouTube video, believe it or not, where a guy's like, oh, here's the 5 best driveline greases to use. And two of them were the Ford grease, but the number 1 top pick was Valvoline SynPower. I don't have it in front of me, of course, but it's a grease, and it's still lithium-based something or other, and it's got a funky smell. All I did was pop the cap, because it came in a tube, pop the cap, and I slid the tube over the drive shaft, the drive line of the transfer case, and then I slipped the drive shaft over it, in and out a few times, get her all nice and spread out, and I went and drove it, and I never saw it again. I spent 6 hours changing engine mounts, hour and a half changing a transmission mount, probably another 2 or 3 hours of diagnostics to try to find this clunk, and it was fixed with a half-dollar size blob of grease on the drive shaft. Can you believe that? I can, because I just did it. It's just ridiculous that some things happen like that. And then I've got this Plymouth Prowler. I can't find nothing on that one. That's a lesson in just learning when to say no. Customer brought it in for oil change, and one of my guys went out to pull it in, and it shut off. The customer had to jump it because they said, drove it in no problem, parked it, everything's good. We go to pull it in to do a simple oil change, and no go. It started, but then it just shut off, and it has not had crank signal since. Key on, like you turn the key, nothing. It says no bus on the dash. I unplugged every module, every computer, every sensor that I could find, trying to get some sort of signal to communicate with something with the scan tool. Nothing works. If you got any ideas on this one, feel free to leave me a comment or something. I asked some people, some colleagues, and I had a lot of good ideas on pulling sensors and all that. I don't get it. So we're just gonna throw our hands up. We told the customer, look, I'm sorry, we can't figure it out. And there's no shame in that. There's no shame in knowing your limits, telling the customer, being honest with them before you charge, $900 in diagnostic labor and not getting anywhere. that one's going to go. I had a Lexus IS 200 250. Made a video on it. If you want to check back on that one in my recent post. It came in, it got towed in because it sat at Jiffy Lube 2 months, I think. I want to say that's how the story went, because they went in for an oil change or something. Whatever the case is, it got towed to us with a no start. I get in it with the jump box and a scanner, and when I first cranked it over, it sounded like it had no compression. But it had been sitting for a long time, and those timing chains bleed down, and as the lifters bleed down, everything bleeds down, and then you gotta wait for it to pump up. Well, I guess they must have used a lot of starting fluid to try to get this thing going, because I held the throttle open, crank, 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 just let it go. Eventually it started to sound like it had compression, and then it started to run, and everything was great. Let it idle, revved it a few times, everything's golden. Alright, well maybe it just needs a tune-up. Maybe it just, somebody fouled out the plugs. Maybe it's a different issue, something, I don't know. So the next day I go to pull it in to do spark plugs and maybe fuel system clean or something. And it started. I go to pull out, and I got 10 feet this direction, and it shut off again. That's weird. So I did some playing around, reset the computer, reset my scanner, restarted it. There were some communication issues. I couldn't get into the computer. It wouldn't let me scan it whenever this would happen. So I thought that was kind of weird. So I ended up pushing it in. Got it in my bay, and I started looking into it a little deeper. And this had an issue, same issue as some of the suggestions on the Prowler I had. Someone said, with that code, it sounds like it was a U105, U0105. And that code specifically was a fuel control module was not communicating. And that code was in the steering system. It's the only module I could read. So I did some research on that code, and they said, oh yeah, it sounds like your fuel pressure sensor went out. Unplug the sensor, and it should start up. If it does, the sensor's dead. You need a new one. Found the sensor under the intake, reached down behind the engine and unplugged it, got in it, hit the button, and it fired right up. Ran a little rough because it doesn't know what fuel pressure is, I guess, but it ran. The entire computer system, the whole system except for a couple modules, was taken out by a fuel pressure sensor. I just don't get it. I don't know how they can be so linked together that one sensor not only takes out that sensor, it takes out the entire communications network. So you can't even pull code. I mean, that kind of gives you an indication as to where to go. So you know, oh, there's a communication issue. Maybe it's this, and then oh, I'll check the 5-volt system, or whatever. I'm not as big on network electrical diagnostics as I am drivability diagnostics. I can do that better. But Toyotas are also a little weird with that. They kind of, when you get a check engine light for an EVAP code, your gas cap can be left off, and it's going to turn off your traction system. It's going to turn off your ABS. It's going to set a light, multiple lights, and just make you go. That thing's going to make you go get it fixed. Lights up like a Christmas tree. I don't know. It's just something I've been thinking about, wanted to share with everybody that cares anyways. And I don't know, hopefully it helps. I don't know if anybody's going to get any use out of this, but it's nice to vent sometimes, I guess. So, if you got any ideas or suggestions on that Prowler, or anything for that matter, feel free to leave a comment.